So let's start first by reviewing some of the etiquettes we covered last week. Anybody can give us a few of the etiquettes we covered last week? So from 10 onwards. Good. Repentance. Yeah. Good. Diligence, firmness, and hope. Humbleness and submission. Good manners and respect. Comprehensive du'as. Good. Facing the qibla. Good. Making du'a in a low voice. Excellent. When? During the salah. Right? During the salah. What about outside of the salah? That's okay. Right? It's okay. Yeah. In the salah, right? That's an important point. Avoid glancing in the sky inside of the salah. But outside the salah is fine. Repetition and persistence. We said something about that. How many times? Yeah, 3 times. But we can go higher than that. 5 times, 25 times as it comes in hadith. But at least 3 times is good as a general recommendation. Good. So there's repetition, and it's actually repeating the same dua. In that one dua you're making, repeating it over and over again, and then also making dua different times. Right? Different times. This is also something recommended. We talked also about facing the qibla, right? Facing the qibla, and that was the last thing we got up to. All right, we'll start with etiquette number 19, which is avoid excessive rhyming. All right, there's an Arabic term for that. Anybody knows the Arabic term for rhyming? Those who are students of Arabic. Anybody knows? Okay, as-Saj'a, right? It's called as-Saj'a, right? As-Saj'a. This is rhyming, right? Rhyming. And this is something that should be avoided. And we say excessive rhyming and intentionally. So when you're making dua, you're intentionally trying to create a nice flow and rhyme. Then this is something that should be avoided because it's an indication that you're focused more on the wording rather than the meaning, right? So excessive rhyming, and pay attention to this term, excessive, right? As we will mention a exception later on. But if it's excessive and the person is going out of their way to make the dua rhyme and sound nice, then this is something that should be avoided, because it is an indication that a person is just focusing on the words and you're not focused on the meaning or your heart being into it. All right, and there is a hadith on that in which the Prophet ﷺ, a long hadith, it's a statement of Ibn Abbas, actually a statement of Ibn Abbas, where he says that preach to the people once a week. Preach to the people once a week. And if you won't, then preach to them twice. But if you want to preach more, then let it be 3 times a week only. And do not make people fed up with this Quran. If you come to some people who are engaged in a talk, don't start interrupting their talk by preaching, lest you should cause them to be bored. You should rather keep quiet, and if they ask you, then preach to them at a time when they are eager to hear what you say. And then the last part of this hadith is what we are concerned with. And avoid the use of rhyme prose. Or the Arabic term for that is as-Saj'a. In invocation, for I notice, so this is the statement of Ibn Abbas. Right? This is the statement of Ibn Abbas. For I noticed that Allah's Messenger ﷺ and his companions always avoided it. So he says here, avoid rhyme prose, right? Which is, the Arabic term for that is called as-Saj'a. If you notice about the first part of this hadith, or this statement from Ibn Abbas, he says, only preach to the people 1 time. All right? And if you have to do it, then 2 times, 3 times the most. So we learn from this that while reminders are good, Allah says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and reminders benefit the believers. Too much reminders are not good either. All right? Because if you go too much into reminders, and every time there's a reminder, then people will get bored and people will get fed up. And this is the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ, and the companions took this from him, that he would not overindulge in reminders. And it's mentioned from Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an, that Ibn Mas'ud used to have a reminder session every Thursday. So he chose Thursdays as days where he would remind the people. And his students, or the people who attended his reminders, they said, we love listening to you. We want you to, remind us more. Can you add more days? And he said that, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتخولنا بالموعظة في الأيام مخافة السآمة علينا. That Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم used to vary the days of reminders. He didn't used to do it every single day because he was afraid that people would get bored. All right, so this is the statement, this hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, where he says that Rasulullah used to vary the reminders. He would not make it too often for fear that people would become bored. And by the way, no one will ever become bored from hearing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is not Rasulullah fearing that people will become bored hearing him speak, but this is for people after him, so that people follow his sunnah and they don't overindulge in reminders. So here Ibn Abbas is saying that keep your reminders once a week or twice a week, at most 3 times a week. By the way, this is not for classes, right? This is for reminders and exhortation and the likes. But when it comes to classes and so on and seeking knowledge, this is encouraged to be busy with that as much as possible. And at the end of the hadith, he says, and avoid the use of rhyme prose, as-Sajr, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to avoid it, and the companions used to avoid it. فَانْظُرَ السَّجْعُ مِنَ الدُّعَاءِ فَاجْتَنِبْهُ فَإِنِّي أَعْهَدْتُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم وَأَصْحَابُهُ لَا يَفْعَلُونَ إِلَّا ذَلِكَ. All right, now there is an objection, which is that we find in some of the du'as of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam rhyming words. Right? We find that there are some du'as that rhyme. Anybody have any examples of du'as that have a rhyme to it? Yeah. Good. Yeah, okay. How does it start? No. Banu Abdik. No. No. Okay. Anything else? Any other rhyming du'as anybody knows? Huh? Good. Allahumma bika asbahna wa bika amsayna. All right. Another dua Rasulullah used to make. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min qalbin la yakhsha wa min ilmin la yanfa' wa min qalbin la yashba' or tashba' wa min qalbin la tashba' wa min nafsin من قلب لا يخشى sorry ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن نفس لا تشبع. Right, so this is rhyme as well. Yeah. أعوذ بك من هؤلاء الأربعة. Yeah. So that's a rhyme as well. And we find numerous other du'as in which there is rhyming. So how do we reconcile? We find that Rasulullah ﷺ did rhyme in his du'as, and then we have the hadith in which we just mentioned that avoid rhyming because Rasulullah ﷺ did not used to do it. So Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he answers this. He says what is meant by a sajr, rhyme prose, is unnatural wording. Right? This is where a person is going out of their way. Right? They're going out of their way to rhyme. All right? And they're intentionally making sure that they rhyme, because this does not correspond with humility and submission. All right. Otherwise, in the invocations of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there can be found rhyme prose, but it is natural. So in the du'as of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when it does rhyme, it is natural. All right. It is not forced. It's not fake. All right. It's natural from his own way of from his heart and saying it from his tongue. So what should be avoided though is when it's forced. When you force yourself to focus on the wording. And try to make it rhyme and try to make it sound, very poetic and so on. All right, so focusing on beautification of the wording rather than the meaning and connection of the heart is a type of transgression in dua. All right, this is a type of transgression. And Rasulullah says in hadith, سَيَكُونُ قَوْمًا يَعْتَدُونَ فِي الدُّعَى. There will be people who will transgress in supplication. All right, so from the types of transgression in supplication is focusing on the wording, and not paying attention to the meaning or paying attention to the connection in the heart. All right, so it is okay to rhyme as long as it's not done forcefully and going out of your way to make it like that. Otherwise, it is something that should be avoided and it's disliked. All right, etiquette number 20, raising the hands. So from the etiquettes of dua is raising the hands up to the shoulder, around up to the shoulder area, right? This area here, raising the hands up to the shoulder. This has come in statement of Ibn Abbas. He says, when asking for something, you should raise your hands opposite to your shoulders or thereabout. When asking for forgiveness, you should point with one finger. And when making earnest supplication, you should stretch out both of your hands. All right, so in the first part of the hadith, he mentions, or the first part of his statement, he mentions that you should raise your hands opposite to your shoulders, right? To be level with the shoulders. Now, raising the hands is a general sunnah, right? General sunnah for dua in general. And it's not limited to the rain prayer alone, as the hadith of Anas suggests. So we have a hadith of Anas. All right, this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim, where Anas radiallahu anhu, he narrates that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not used to raise his hands in invocations except in the istisqa, the prayer for rain, in which he used to raise his hands so high that one could see the whiteness of his armpits. All right, so this is a statement of Anas, where he says, كَانَ لَا يَرْفَعُ يَدَيْهِ فِي شَيْءٍ مِّن دُعَائِهِ إِلَّا فِي الْإِسْتِسْقَاءِ. So this is a very clear statement from Anas. It seems to suggest that we should not be raising our hands except in the rain prayer. The scholars have reconciled the statement of Anas with the various other hadiths, and they've said that either Anas radiallahu anhu did not see Rasulullah raise his hands in any other place, and so he's talking about what he saw, right? Meaning I only saw Rasulullah raising his hands for the rain prayer, right? Either Anas is referring to like saying what he only knows or what he saw, or he's talking about raising the hands and exaggerating, raising it all the way high, right? And this maybe is what he's referring to. Not that he didn't raise his hands, but he's talking about raising it like high to the sky. This is what Rasulullah used to raise it in the rain prayer to the point where the whiteness of his armpits would be seen. All right, so this is how the scholars reconciled. Otherwise, this statement of Anas, it cannot be taken on face value because there are numerous hadiths, right? Over 30 different places where it is narrated that Rasulullah raised his hands. Imam al-Shawkani, he says, concerning raising the hands in dua, the evidence for it is what has been reported from the Prophet ﷺ, that he raised his hands in about 30 different instances in various supplications. Right? So we cannot use the hadith of Anas as proof that we should only raise the hands in rain prayer, because we have other hadith, over 30 different instances in which Rasulullah raised his hands. All right? Therefore, we say that raising the hands is a general sunnah, and it is not limited just to the rain prayer. It is a general sunnah, and when you make dua, to raise your hands to the level of the shoulders. And as for the hadith of Anas, then it's either he is narrating what he saw. And remember Anas he was young, right? He began to serve Rasulullah ﷺ when he was 10 years old, and he died. Rasulullah died when Anas was 20. So he was young. Maybe he wasn't with the Prophet ﷺ all the time, so he did not see what the others saw. Or he's talking about an exaggerating form of raising the hands. Otherwise, raising the hands is a sunnah of the dua, and it should be something that should be done, not just limited to the rain prayer. And we'll mention a few of these other hadiths about raising the hands. The hadith in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ appointed a man from the tribe of Azd called Ibn Utbiyah for collecting the zakat. But he returned, he said, this, the zakat that he collected is for you, and this has been given to me as a present. So this man, he's in charge of collecting the zakat. So he goes and he collects his zakat, and somebody gives him a present. And the Prophet ﷺ got very upset that he took this present. The Prophet ﷺ said, so the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith is mentioned, but other narrations mention that the Prophet ﷺ got up on the minbar and he was very upset and angry, and he said, why hadn't he stayed in his father's or mother's house to see whether he would be given presents or not? by him in whose hands my life is, whoever takes something from the resources of the zakat unlawfully will be carrying it on his neck on the day of resurrection. If it be a camel, it will be grunting. If a cow, it will be mooing. And a sheep, it will be bleating. And then the Prophet then raised his hands till we saw the whiteness of his armpits. And he said thrice, "O Allah, have I conveyed? Allahumma ballaght," 3 times. Haven't I conveyed your message to them 3 times? Alright, so this hadith is proof that raising the hands is a sunnah, not just in the rain prayer, but it is a general sunnah that Rasulullah used to do when he would make dua. Now, why is Rasulullah upset at this man who's collecting the zakat? Why is he upset? What this man took, what did he take? Well, but what is it really? If you're collecting zakat from somebody, would somebody just give you a present? It's a bribe, right? It's a bribe. Right? If you're collecting zakat from somebody, right, you're already giving them your money. Why would you give them more money? Unless you're giving them, something so that they will take less. All right. So the Prophet was upset because if this maybe was a bribe, or it would lead to accepting bribes, and this is a big problem in many Muslim countries. Right. Those of us who are from Muslim countries, right, we know that bribes and corruption is a big problem. All right. So the Prophet wanted to remove this kind of thing, and so he did not. He was upset when the zakat collector took this present, because this would be seen as a bribe. All right, so in the end of the hadith, the Prophet raised his hands. All right, he raised his hands, and so this is a proof that raising the hands is a sunnah in dua. All right, another hadith, the Prophet asked for some water. We mentioned this hadith earlier in last week as well. He asked for some water and performed the ablution, and then he raised his hands towards the sky and said, "O Allah, forgive Ubayd Abi Amir." I saw the whiteness of his armpits while he was raising his hands. And he added, "O Allah, upgrade him over many of your human creatures on the day of resurrection." And another hadith, Allah's Messenger ﷺ raised both his hands towards the sky, and at that time there was not a trace of cloud in the sky. This is referring to the actual rain prayer. He raised his hands towards the sky, there was no trace of clouds, and then as soon as he made the dua, the clouds started to gather like mountains. And we also mentioned this hadith before, "Inna Allah hayyun kareem." Your Lord is munificent and generous, and He's ashamed to turn away empty the hands of a certain servant when He raises them to Him. All right. So all these hadiths are proof and evidence that raising the hands is a general sunnah when making dua. With an exception, the scholar mentioned that the khatib, when he's making dua on the minbar, he should not raise his hands. All right. The khatib, when he's making dua on the minbar during the khutbah, he should not raise his hands. Other than that, outside of the salah, raising the hands is a general sunnah. The congregation, nothing has been narrated for or against it. Allahu a'lam. Some scholars allow it, some scholars say you shouldn't do it. But that matter is more flexible, inshallah. Can you make dua without raising the hands? Yes. You can make dua without raising your hands. But this is one of the etiquettes of raising the hands. And it shows a person's desperation. When a person is a person is begging, right? What do? Right? They outstretch their hands. Right, yeah. So it doesn't have to be done, yeah. There might be situations where you want to make a quick dua and it might not be appropriate to raise your hands at that time. That's okay. So it doesn't have to be done. Dua can be done without raising hands, but it's a general recommendation. Yeah. Yeah, this is a statement of Ibn Abbas, where he says pointing the finger to the sky when you're seeking forgiveness. I haven't come across anything hadith on that, but this is a statement from Ibn Abbas. But I haven't come across anything directly from the Prophet on that. Can we pay that person? Yeah, so from the categories of people who can receive the zakah, it's mentioned in the Quran, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. Those who are working to collect the zakat, they can actually take a portion of the zakat. But this is part of the official distribution of the zakat. Right? But what's mentioned in the hadith is not, he wasn't taking it as a form of payment. He was taking it as a gift. All right? He was taking it as a gift, which can be seen as a bribe that he was taking, so that he does not take as much from the person who owes the zakat. Right? So a person might give this, let's say he owes, and the people collecting the zakat, usually this is for like the animals, when you have to collect the animals. So maybe let's say that person, they owe 100 camels. All right? You give the person the gift, and then the zakat collector says, give me 80 instead. All right? So something like that, where it can be seen as a bribe, or it maybe lead to the person collecting it being light, all right, being lax, or being not wanting to take the full amount because this person gave him a gift. Right? But otherwise, it is permissible for the person collecting the zakat to take it as a payment, and it's mentioned in the Quran as the 8 categories of the people who can receive zakat is وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, those who are working to collect the zakat. But that cannot come from the person paying them. Right? That money cannot come from that has to come from the leader, the sultan, giving that person. After it's been collected, then he redistributes it to the zakat workers. But it's not going to come directly from the person who is paying the zakat, because then that will be kind of a sort of bribery. We don't know what kind of gift he was given. Yeah, Allahu A'lam. All right, etiquette number 21, saying Ameen. Right, also from the etiquettes of dua is saying Ameen. And we know that because Surah Al-Fatiha is a dua, and we say this at the end of every Fatiha we recite in the Salah, Ameen. What does Ameen mean? Anyone? What does it actually mean? Good. Allahumma As-Siddiq, which means, in English? Oh Allah, answer. Oh Allah, answer our supplication. All right, and this is for both the one who's making the dua and the listener. Right, it's recommended for both the dua and the one making the dua and the one listening to the dua. All right, everyone should say Ameen. And it means, oh Allah, answer our supplication. This hadith has some slight weakness, but we'll mention it here. Narrated by Abu Dawud. We went out with Allah's Messenger ﷺ one night and came upon a man who made supplication with persistence. The Prophet ﷺ said, he will have done something which guarantees if he puts a seal on it. So this man was making a supplication, and the Prophet ﷺ was saying that he should put a seal on it if he wants his dua to be guaranteed and answered. He should put a seal on this dua. So one of the people asked, what should he use for a seal? What is the seal of the dua? And he replied, Ameen. Right, saying Ameen, this is the seal of the dua. And then we know that in the Salah, when the Imam says, غَيْرُ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ, the Prophet says that a person should say Ameen. Because whoever says Ameen, فَمَنْ وَافَقَ تَأْمِينُهُ تَأْمِينَ الْمَلَائِكَ غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ. Then you must say Ameen, for if one's utterance of Ameen coincides with that of the angels, then his past sins will be forgiven. So saying Ameen is another etiquette of dua. Etiquette number 22. Yeah. Question is, what a person says Ameen, thumma Ameen. It's just an emphasis. Allahu Alam. It's just, an emphasis. But then, if you say it, keep going over, and then a person says another thumma Ameen, and then you end up, one is sufficient. Allahu Alam. But if it's a means of emphasis, Allahu Alam, it's okay. Yeah, so in the Salah, when we say Ameen, the angels are also saying Ameen. So if you say Ameen at the same time as the angels, right, at the same time, obviously we're not going to hear them. Right? No, but it should be done after the Imam. If you say it when the Prophet tells you to say it, then this will be coinciding. Right? In other words, you say it, you don't say it before he finishes Wala Dhalleen. Right? And you don't say it when he starts reciting the next surah. Yeah. Yeah, so if you look at the hadith, right, when the Imam says غَيْرُ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ, once he finishes the Fatiha, then you must say Ameen. Right? And this is an indication that once you say it at this time, then this is coinciding with the angels. And So sometimes the imam, depending on the madhab, he might say it silently. All right, whether he's saying it silently or loudly, he should still be saying it. So as long as you're saying it after he finishes Fatiha, then this is what is meant. If the imam's madhab is to say it silently, and you view it to be loud, should you say it loud or silent? It would depend on circumstances, maybe. If you're in like a country where they're all following the Hanafi madhab, right? And they're all following the Hanafi madhab, they don't say Ameen loud. And if you say Ameen loud, you're going to cause confusion and fitna, then maybe it's best to say it silently. But if you're in a mixed congregation where people understand that some people are saying it loud, some people are not, then it's okay. It might depend on the circumstance. Etiquette number 22, wiping the face. This is a bit of a controversial one, and there's a long debate amongst the scholars about wiping the face. Should we wipe the face after dua or not? All right, a long debate amongst the scholars, and this discussion is on two points. Number one is inside of the salah. Inside of the salah, majority of scholars say don't wipe your face when you make dua inside of the salah. All right, so if you're making dua, obviously in sajda you won't wipe your face. But if you're making the kunut, right, dua kunut, also majority of scholars say you should not wipe your face inside of the salah. All right, outside of the salah, this is recommended, and this is according to majority of the scholars, and this is the position of the four madhahib. All right, the four madhahib is that it is recommended to wipe the face after the dua. But what's the reason for the controversy? The reason for the controversy is that there are numerous hadiths that have been narrated, but they're pretty much all weak. They're all weak hadiths. So the debate amongst the scholars is these weak hadiths. There's numerous weak hadiths. Do these weak hadiths combine together to make it acceptable? Right? There's a concept in hadith sciences, which is that if you have a number of weak hadith, 1 weak hadith, 2 weak hadith, 3 weak hadith, can they gather together and strengthen each other to make them authentic or not? Right? This is a concept in hadith sciences. So there's some scholars who say that all these hadith are weak, but put together, they strengthen each other and they upgrade the hadith from being weak to acceptable. All right, so based on that, a number of scholars have said that these hadith, even though they're individually each they're weak, they combine together, they strengthen each other, and so they rise to makes the hadith to a level of authenticity. And this is the statement of Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah. He says that there are other narrations which supports this narration. He after mentioning hadith on wiping the face, he says that there are other narrations which support this narration, of which is the hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas, related by Abu Dawood and others, and he says put together they indicate that it is Hasan. So this is the position of Ibn Hajar. Ibn Hajar is one of the foremost scholars of hadith, and he's known as Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith. He is one of the greatest hadith scholars, and his position is that all these hadiths together, combined, they strengthen each other and they make this hadith authentic, which is wiping over the face. So inshallah, if a person wants to wipe over the face, it's okay. If one does not want to, they feel that the hadith is not enough evidence, then that's okay as well, right? But there should not be any condemnation if a person is wiping over their face. As we said, just avoid it inside of the salah. The salah is a bit more restrictive. In the salah, avoid it. Although this is also a position of some of the scholars that it can be done also in the salah. Right, and even if the hadith are deemed weak, right? Even if we say that the hadith is weak, we also have a position amongst many of the scholars, which is that hadith that are weak, they may be acted upon in fada'il al-a'mal, right? So when it comes to halal and haram, the scholars are very strict. When it comes to hadith, if the hadith is related to matters of halal and haram, it must be authentic. Right? There's no compromising when it comes to halal and haram matters. But in extra virtuous action, what we call fada'il al-a'mal, then many of the scholars say that you can use weak hadith and you can act upon weak hadith as long as the hadith is not severely weak or it does not contradict anything else authentic. So inshallah, it is permissible to wipe the face when making dua. What is the wisdom of wiping the face? Anyone? What is the wisdom of wiping the face? Yeah. Hmm? Okay. Letting people know you're done. Okay. What if you're by yourself? Okay. Wiping away tears, possibly. Okay. Okay. So you kind of like want to keep it with you, right? Keep that. Yeah. I'm not sure. So one of the wisdoms is that as we said, right, raising the hands is from the etiquettes of dua. So you're using your hands to make dua, and the scholars have indicated that uh, because you're using your hands, then that mercy is, the rahmah is descending upon your hands, all right, and then you're extending that rahmah to the noblest part of your body, which is the face. All right, so it's basically just extending the mercy that is, you know, that has fallen on your hands when you make the dua, and extending it to your face because your face is the most noble part of your body. This is a reason that some of the scholars have given. It's not something that Rasulullah said, but this is something that some of the scholars have suggested is wisdom for wiping the face. All right, any questions on that? All right, moving on. All right, plural form in congregation. When making congregational dua, the imam should not restrict the wording to himself. He should use the plural form. All right, so obviously this would require a bit of basic Arabic, right? That you would, if you're making the dua in Arabic, that you would say we, right? Forgive us instead of forgive me. So if you're making a dua and you're an imam making dua for the congregation, then you should not restrict the dua to yourself only. Oh Allah, forgive me, have mercy on me. Rather, forgive us, have mercy on us. And there's a hadith on this in which Rasulullah says that there are three things which are unlawful for anyone to do. A man must not act as an imam for others in prayer and make a supplication for himself, excluding them. For if he does this, he has acted treacherously towards them. And no one must look inside a house before asking permission to enter, for if he does so, he has acted treacherously towards its inhabitants. And no one should pray while retaining urine, but should first relieve himself. All right, so the hadith at the beginning here mentions that imam should not. Another hadith mentions in prayer, right? In prayer, and so some calls this khiyana, right? If he does this, in fa'ala faqad khanahum. The imam does this and he singles himself out for the dua, and he does not include the congregation. Then Rasulullah said that he has betrayed the people, right? Because now he's essentially being selfish, right? He's being selfish. He's not including the congregation in the dua. Now there's an objection. Anybody can think of an objection to this? Anybody looking at specifically in the salah? The hadith mentioned in the salah. All right, in the salah, a man who is leading the salah, he should make, when he makes the supplication, not just make for himself, but he should make and include the congregation. Okay, you're on the right track. So you said making dua from the Quran or Sunnah. Okay, you're on the right track. Anybody else want to add to that? So the objection, so the ruling on this, by the way, is dislike, right? Dislike to do this. Objection: how can it be prohibited to make dua in singular form in salah when there are authentic hadith that the Prophet made dua in the singular form in his salah? All right, we have hadiths in which Rasulullah used to make dua in a singular form. So when he would make the opening takbir, one of the du'as he would make, Allahumma ba'id bayni wa bayna khataya kama ba'adta bayna al-mashriqi wal maghrib. Allah, distance me from my sins, just as you distance the east from the west. And he used a singular form. All right, and yes, that's singular as well. Yeah. So if you're doing it in collection, then you should switch it to the plural form. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If not, then you say however you do it. All right. So we find that there are du'as that the Prophet used to make, uh, and it was in singular form. Also between the sajdas, he would say, "Rabbi firli warhamni wahdi." Right. Allah forgive me, guide me. Right. Have mercy on me. So this is all in a singular form. So what's the answer to that objection? That we find du'as that Rasul made in the singular form, but then the hadith mentions that he said that whoever does this has betrayed the people. And it's like, huh? Okay, expand. Good, yeah, good. So yeah, it's essentially talking about the silent du'as, right? Those du'as that you're saying to yourself, the silent ones, even if you're the imam, you can make those for yourself. All right, but what's referred to in the hadith is the du'as that you're making, like the qunut. Right? Specifically, this hadith is talking about the qunut. Right, the qunut, where everybody else is listening to the imam's du'a. In that situation, then the imam has to make it, or he should make it, encompassing everybody. As for a person making du'a in their sajda or after the opening takbir or any other part of the salah, in which the du'a is silent and the people behind the imam are not hearing it, then it's okay for the imam to make the du'a in singular form, as has come in the numerous hadiths in which Rasulullah was making du'as in the singular form. Right? So this hadith is referring to qunut specifically, not in places where both the imam and follower make du'a. All right, now this etiquette, the hadith is talking about salah, right? In salah, but it can be applied to outside of salah as well. Right? It can be applied to outside of salah as well, if there is du'a being made in congregation. Right? And now we had a question on the congregational du'a before, right? So we can address that here. Become a very controversial topic. Right? Can you make du'a al-jama'i? Can you make congregational du'a? And it has risen to the point where some people say it is bid'ah. It is an innovation for people to make du'a in congregation. But in reality, this discussion does not have to go to that level of saying that it is innovation, because congregational du'a, it actually can be found in the Quran and in numerous hadith as well. All right, so in the Quran, or in the salah, for example, right, when we're praying behind the imam and we recite Fatiha, that is congregational du'a, and we say Ameen. Right, so it's in the salah itself. It's also in the Quran, in Surah Yunus. Prophet Musa alayhi salam made a du'a. He made a du'a against Fir'aun and the people of Fir'aun, and then Allah says in the next verse, قَدْ أُجِيبَتْ دَعْوَتُكُمَا. Allah says that we have answered your du'a, and He's speaking to both Prophet Musa and Prophet Harun. So Allah says, قَدْ أُجِيبَتْ دَعْوَتُكُمَا. I have answered, or your du'a has been answered, even though Musa was the one making the du'a. And the scholars have mentioned that كَانَ مُوسَى يَدْعُو وَهَارُونَ يُؤَمِّنُ. That Musa was the one making the du'a and Harun was saying Ameen. So Allah says that your du'a has been answered, even though Musa was the one making the du'a and Harun was the one responding. And then we know that Rasulullah used to also make the du'a in the qunut, in the qunut for calamities. He would make, for an entire month, he made du'a against certain people who committed some crimes. And it's also narrated from some of the Sahaba as well. For example, Anas radiallahu anhu, it's mentioned in narrations that whenever he would become close to completing the Quran, he would do a khatam of the Quran. كَانَ يَجْمَعُ أَهْلَهُ وَيَدْعُ بِهِمْ. He would gather his family together and he would make dua. Right, so there are numerous instances in which this has been done. Although the origin or the default is that dua is something personal between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there might be cases in which it might be okay or even preferable for dua to be done in congregation, such as the fact that the people don't know how to make dua. Right? We're doing these etiquettes of dua, but people, they might not know the etiquettes of dua. They might not know how to make dua. Or the people might not know the du'as of the Quran and Sunnah. And so as a way of letting the people hear the du'as of the Quran and Sunnah, it is done in congregation. Right? Or as a means of teaching the people. Right? A lot of times, many of the du'as we learn from hearing it. Right? If you tell people, go and learn this dua and read it in the book and memorize it, how many people are going to do that? As opposed to, you hear the dua and then you memorize it because you heard the the imam making it. So there might be cases in which it might be beneficial to do the dua in the congregation for these reasons that we mentioned before. And there are evidences for it, as we mentioned in the Quran and from the Hadith, right? But of course, the origin is that dua is to be done, or the best way the dua is your personal connection, your personal conversation with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and you should not lose that quality or that attribute of having that connection with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and become dependent on somebody always making dua for you. Allah Alam. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So some of the some of the scholars, they have mentioned um, that even if it's to be done, they said that maybe it should not become a habit. Right. So there's a statement of Ibn Taymiyyah. He says, "الاجتماع على القراءة والذكر والدعاء حسن مستحب إذا لم يتخذ ذلك عادة راتبة كالاجتماعات المشروعة ولا اقترن به بدعة منكرة." Ibn Taymiyyah, he says that gathering together for recitation of Quran, dhikr, and dua is something good, allowed, as long as it's not taken as a something permanent, something that's done every single time. So that can be said that if it's allowed, maybe avoid doing it every single time to the point where people feel or they get to the idea that this is the only way it can be done. Right. So it hasn't been specifically narrated that the Prophet some did that, but as it does not necessarily mean that it's prohibited to do so either. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not allowed to do it. As we said, it comes down to also the reason, right? As we said, sometimes, especially in family gatherings like funerals, you have a lot of people coming, and they have no clue what dua is, right? We tell them pray for the deceased person. They have no clue what to say, or how to make a dua, what to start with, what duas to make. So in that case, they might be doing more harm if they make a dua than benefit. So in that case, it could be looked at as more beneficial for the imam or a person of knowledge to make that dua for them. Allahu Alam. Yeah, any question?
I guess can you name a specific instance where we are not allowed to make dua?
When we're not allowed to,
Yes, where we are not allowed
um, I can't think of any specific. We would need a text for that, like a specific prohibition. Maybe you could say in the salah, right, where dua in when you're in the standing position reciting, right, possibly. But your question is that when you're not allowed to.
where we are not allowed
So that would come back to the ruling on dua in general. Is there any time where you're not allowed to make dua? All right. Is there any time that would maybe extend to if you're in the bathroom or places like that? But if we say that it is permissible to make dua individual or congregation, then that would be the same ruling as individual. All right. The most that can be said maybe is that it should be avoided to do it on a consistent basis all the time, to the point where people would think that it is something that can only be done that way.
Okay, so let me get a little more specific.
Mhm.
Take for instance, go to the burial.
Yeah.
At the burial, we find some of the people of the who live in this present day. There are certain verses of the Quran they would recite,
Mhm.
right? And then make a dua. Like take for instance, they're going to read certain part of Surah Baqarah, certain part of Surah Yasin, and what happened,
Mhm.
right? And then we will have a congregational dua. So that is one instance.
So you're asking, is it allowed
Yeah.
to do it at that point? As far as the recitation of the Quran, right? They may be acting on certain narrations. There are narrations that certain Sahaba used to recite verses from Baqarah, right? So if they're relying on something that has been narrated, then it's okay, right? If they have some kind of proof and evidence. So, for example, the verses of Baqarah that has been narrated that some of the Sahaba used to recite Baqarah. Recitation of Yasin, there's a general hadith on that, right? اقرأوا على موتاكم ياسين على موتاكم. Recite Yasin on your dead ones. Now, extending it, when does that apply to when they are on their deathbed, or does that apply to after they've died? The hadith it's not explicit. So, right, but the hadith is not explicit. It doesn't say mautakum. It could mean that when they're dying. It can also mean after they passed away and they've left the world already. So it's not explicitly clear. So a person can make the argument that there's a way of interpreting the hadith and then using that to justify it. But the issue though is when you make it into a specific ritual. This has to be done, right? If you don't do it, then the funeral is incomplete, right? Or there's a problem if we don't do it this way. This is where the problem comes in. When
The application on that, this sort of Yasin of Bakra, that is something that at least people who've done this, all the time, and pouring the water on the grave.
Mhm. Yeah, pour in the water as well. That has common narrations as well, and this is a recommendation of some of the scholars as well. So some of these things are disputed. And because there's subject of some of these are valid, this difference of opinion, it should not come to the level of condemnation. Whoever sees it as something that should be done and you have evidence for it, then let them do it, and whoever doesn't, then avoid it. Right? But the main thing is that it should be done with some sort of evidence. As I said, like the recitation of Baqarah, there are narrations that some of the Sahaba used to recite verses from Baqarah. Right? We have the hadith on Yasin, which can be interpreted in a certain way to justify that. Although it might be, you could say it's a stretch, right? But it can be interpreted that way as well.
So, one more part of this question.
Okay.
I know other people might need it. So, take for instance that we move to the burial ground.
Mm-hmm.
After the body is being buried, there is a dua, right? I have a little bit of uneasiness about raising our hand, even though sometimes our sheikhs or our imam is there and they call upon us to make this dua. I will raise my hand just not to have any conflict, because people look at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they, of course, they ask me, why you did it. But I said I do, but I turn away from the grave.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of raising our hand in dua, and you make us like a circle, everybody come in a circle, you make the dua. Raising your hand, and you're raising your hand towards the grave. How do we apply this in a situation?
Okay, so
Raising your hand.
as we said, raising the hands in dua is a general sunnah, and the only exception we had given is the imam on the minbar when he's making the khutbah. Other than that, anytime you make dua, it is permissible to raise your hands. So as long as you're making dua, you can raise your hands. So there's no issue in raising your hands when you're making dua, right? Or you're following somebody else making dua. The issue of facing the graves, some of the scholars have mentioned that you should face the qibla, but not all. Right? Not all have mentioned. They've said it's allowed. And so as we mentioned earlier, right? This is one of the earlier etiquettes we gave of facing the qibla is a general sunnah of dua, but there can be exceptions as well. Just as the khatib is making dua on the minbar, he's not facing the qibla, right? He's facing the congregation. So it is not it's not a must that you have to face the qibla. There are certain times where it's allowed to not face the qibla when making dua. And some of the scholars have mentioned that it is okay to face the grave. Obviously, as long as the person is not getting carried away and thinking they're addressing the person in the grave and so on. If it's free from those kind of beliefs, then there are scholars who have allowed facing the grave and making dua, and some scholars have said avoid it. So it might be best on the safe side. If you know the direction of the qibla, face the qibla and make the dua. But it's not necessarily a must. Allahu A'lam. Yeah.
This is why he says that they're so important, because of the criticism or bid'ah, many good brothers like themselves, right, refrain from accepting these practices, whereas they were actually, as you said, mentioned there in the hadith and practices. And I think we mentioned before that some sort of imams sanction reciting Quran as a great sanctuary.
Yes. Yeah. Recitation of Quran is also one of those things that's differed upon, but it is a madhab of Imam Shafi'i and others that recitation of the Quran is good and recommended at the graveside as well. So, as I said, a lot of these things, they are a legitimate difference of opinion. A person should follow what they believe is correct, but they should not rise to the level of condemnation. All right, you should not rise to the level of condemnation. But if you don't feel comfortable with something, then don't do it. Right? Don't. If you follow a certain position, then follow that position, and but don't let it fall to the level of condemnation. Whatever I've said here, obviously there might be other different views as well. All right? We're not saying that this is the only view. You might find another scholar says completely the opposite. This is how Islamic scholarship works, right? Somebody might have a completely different view, and they say this is completely innovation. All right, what I've given here is the viewpoint that I'm taking, and I've brought evidences. Somebody might say something otherwise. So at the end of the day, you have to follow what you believe is correct.
So I noticed with journalists and Masjid is sort of a standard practice after the salah, because it came to like the guidance through.
Yeah.
Do they standardize it and take it as something that's something encouraged, something fun? Like how do they approach it? Because the nuance you're saying here is that we don't standardize it, we don't make it a routine practice.
Mm-hmm.
We do it here and there. Like where's the nuance there versus their approach, which seems from the outsider extremely standard.
Mm-hmm. So the question is on certain Ahnaf, the Hanafi madhab, or people follow that madhab. They have this practice. It's not only them, by the way. It's other madhab as well, of making dua after every salah. So the question is, congregational. So
So I'm saying it seems from the outsider that it's a standard.
Yes.
But you're saying the nuance that we should take is that we don't make it standard.
Yeah. So this is So those who allowed it, right? There are those who. So there's maybe we can say three viewpoints, right? One viewpoint is that it is allowed, and once it's allowed, then there's no need to restrict it, right? If it's allowed, there's no need to restrict it. For example, it's 8:30 right now, right? I want to recite some Quran. Right? Is this allowed? All right. Do we have a specific hadith that Rasulullah recited at 8:30? We don't, right? I want to recite Quran every day at 8:30 as a habit. Is it allowed? Right. It's allowed. All right. So one argument is that if it's allowed, there's no reason to restrict it. All right. The other view is in the middle, which is that it's allowed but restricted so that people don't think it's something that has to be done. So not because it's not allowed, but because people might get the idea that it's something that has to be done. And then the third view is it's an innovation. All right, that's the third view. So if you want to be in the middle, that's good as well. All right, but if you say it's permissible, it's permissible. All right, and maybe we can say that avoid it all the time so that people don't get that idea. All right, or maybe we can say educate the people and say that it's not something that has to be done. But that might be the safest thing to do if it's to be done.
Where would you find the majority of Islamic scholars in the tradition aligning with those three views?
So majority of later scholars across the madhahib, maybe not all the madhahib, but a number of them, they do view this as recommended. Actually, it's in the books of fiqh. to make dua after the salah in congregation. It's mentioned that, right? Obviously, it's not something that's there in the earlier generations, but it is there mentioned in the books of fiqh later on. For that very reason, of the reason given is usually as a form of teaching the people, right? Teaching the people, letting the people hear the du'as of the Quran and Sunnah. But as we said, the safe position is to either avoid it, or if you do it, don't do it all the time. Occasionally, so that it doesn't become something people feel is part of the salah, because that is a problem, right? It has become a problem to the point where there are people who, especially in those places where it became habitual, that if the imam doesn't do it, then they think something's wrong with the salah, and they think that this is, there's a deficiency in the salah. So as a result, as kind of a reaction to that, then people went the other way of not allowed at all. So there's this back and forth discussion. Allahu A'lam.
Inshallah, I want to share one experience being active in Masjid for many years. In the past, we used to have the dua like Assalamu, one used to do years ago. And then some people complain that the Imam always making the dua, and we are not having the opportunity to make our own zikr or our own dua.
Mhm.
And so they feel that it's something that the Imam can ask for them, right? By the same token, everybody has to go, right? And so they are not finding the opportunity to make those zikr, those dua for themselves.
Well, definitely, before any dua, you should be doing the adhkar of the salah. And if the dua is interrupting that, then we can definitely say that's an innovation. If right after the salah, because right after the salah we have clear guidance on what to do, to make istighfar 3 times, all right, to Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam. We have clear guidance on what to do directly after the salah. So if that's being replaced with dua, and people are not able to do the things that have been clearly narrated in the sunnah, then this would fall under the category of innovation, because now you're replacing something. Yeah. So once it comes to that point, then now after the people have gotten the chance to do their azkar, their own personal azkar, then that maybe would open up the door for at that point, but not before. People have to be able to do their azkar after the salah. Allahu A'lam. It's a very obviously controversial topic. As I said, what I've mentioned here, you might find completely different viewpoints. One all the way over here, one all over here. All right, this is the reality. So as I said, everybody follows what you feel is correct, but don't let it rise to the level of condemnation or division, or where voices are raised and there's argumentation and so on and so forth, because this is not good either. Wallahu a'lam. I think we'll stop here for today. I think maybe like 4 more etiquettes of dua to finish off the etiquettes, and then afterwards we will move into the times and places that are best for dua to be answered. That will be inshallah in the next session. So we will end with that today. Jazakumullah khairan. Sallallahu alaihi wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanaka wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.